Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We want to understand the concept of secularism and the concept of secularization of Islam. What does it mean and what does it involve and what does it entail? So this is a very minor writing, short writing, a short piece. We are just going to use it to provide an anchor for our discussion. So, and obviously there's a distinction between secularism and secularization, because secularism is a set of ideas and secularization is a process. Okay. Now, what is secularism? So this is a different definition of secularism than we hear normally. Secularism is the process of the substitution. So basically, what we are defining here is secularization. Substitution of the worship of God by the worship of man. And worship of man mean men and women worshipping themselves. And when they worship themselves, basically what they worship is their desires. They hand over their lives to desires in the social life world. So social world is the life of your personal life, your family life, and your day-to-day interaction with other people and other families, etc. All modern, postmodern, metamodern social orders are characterized by secularization. So this is the definition of secularization. So let us try to unpack this definition and then we'll move on. What is secularization? Okay, so what is secularization? Secularization is the process. It's a process through of the substitution of the worship of God by the worship of man. And worship of man, basically worship of desires in social life world. What does this mean? So it's the process in which you substitute the worship of God by the worship of desires or worship in your social life world. Now, social life world is your day-to-day life, your immediate experiences, and your relationships. So this includes relationship with your own self, your daily routines, your values, your desires, your aspirations. That's one thing. And then your self's relationship with other selves and all those things in relation to that. And the center of this is family life. And friendships, and network of family to family relationship, and network of friendships which constitute our social life. And our social life basically revolves around, customs, habits, expectations, rituals, custom, habits, rituals, entertainment, and basically these things include birth and rituals and customs related to that. Then you have wedding and all related things, and then you have death and rituals according to that. Also include food, consumption of food, sharing food with friends and with families, your parties, your guests, etc. This is your daily life. Now, this daily life, if it is governed by worship of God, then we call that social life of religious life. For example, pre-modern Christian, social life was a religious life. On the even today's, Muslim social life, I mean, it is being secularized, but it's still in many parts of the world we have, a glimpse of their social life, which is governed by worship of God. So this is a different conception of worship of God, which might be alien to modern ears because of the very success of secularism, secularization. This conception of worship of God doesn't mean actually praying or actual rituals of worship of God, even though that includes as well. But this concept of worship of God is that your social life basically is an exemplification of and a practice of worship of God. And the way you do is that your customs and habits, your rituals, your routines, daily routines, your entertainments are infused with religious ethos And basically your social life is submission to the will of God, and you express that submission through forming customs and habits and rituals and routines and entertainments in a way which expresses that. So you're the birth of your children or your grandchildren and rituals surrounding that express the worship God. The death and rituals surrounding it, or marriage and rituals surrounding it, and friendship and rituals surrounding it, and your family life and rituals and customs surrounding it, your social life like family to family relationships or your friendships, they're all infused with and governed by and our expression of submission to the will of God. That's what religious life means. And secularization is the process through which this social life, your customs, your habit, is governed by and infused by not the worship of God, but the worship of desires. Desires is the overwhelming force and motive. And to the extent that desires shape our customs, our daily routines, our relationships, our habits and customs, we can say that society has been secularized. Social life has been secularized. Now, if you notice that this sort of secularization is compatible with some sort of formal religiosity and formal belonging to a religious group or religious life. So, for example, you might obey formal rules of Islam in your family life, for example. Formal rules. You might still go to masjid or church or whatever. And you are not breaking many formal rules, but your social life is still, if it is shaped by the worship of desires, and desire is the overwhelming motivational force, then your social life to that extent is secular. So in that sense, secular doesn't necessarily mean anti-religious. Secular means that your life or part of your life is dominated by desires rather than worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what secularization means actually as a process. Okay, and it is compatible with even rigorous form adherence to religious life. Okay, you might be going to masjid, you might not take interest, for example, or you might not you do your wedding and your burials according to Islamic norms. You don't break any formal rules, but still the dominant force in your life which shapes your rituals and shapes your custom is not the religious ethos, not the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And religious ethos mean worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or worship of God, but it is the worship of desires. So in that sense, that social life is secular. A person is secular even though formally belongs to a religion, formally adhere to religious rule. Although, arguably, this sort of thing cannot last for too long, too long. You know what I mean? If society is thoroughly secularized, then eventually it becomes harder and harder to even adhere to formal beliefs and formal religious practices. And the history of the European civilization or European societies is a good example of that. Okay, so I think let's go back to the text and see if we want to do a bit more today. Otherwise, we'll just stop here. So this is the definition of secularization. Secularization is the process of substitution of worship of God by worship of man in social life. All modern, pre-modern, and meta-modern social orders are characterized by secularization. So this is the definition of secularization which we went through, and the main thing which we learned from it is that at least at the start, or at least in theory, it's possible for people to be religious, formally religious, and the society and people to be thoroughly secularized. And that's what normally happens. Religious societies don't just move to non-religious or anti-religious societies directly. First, what happens first is formal religiosity is actually increased even. But at the social level, the process of secularization occur. That is, social life world is increasingly shaped not by the worship of God and its ethos of the worship of God, but by the worship of man or worship of desire. And eventually then the conditions are prepared for more full-fledged anti-religiosity to prosper. So when we talk about secularization of Islam, what we mean is that the same process is happening to Islam which happened to the Christian society 200 years ago in the form of Protestantism or similar sort of things, where your formal life was religious, but your social life became increasingly secularized, in the sense that your social world wasn't the dominant expression of the worship of God, but became the expression of the worship of desires. Okay, let's stop here and we'll continue this, inshallah.